Franny and Mary and Access and all the people that I have not yet met today. I am Chris Hilderbrant. I'm Chief Operating Officer with the Center for Disability Rights in Rochester, New York. I grew up down in Dansville, so I'm a Western New York native and been working around Rochester, working at CDR actually for 14 years. My journey as a person with a disability actually started just a couple months before the ADA was signed into law. When I was 14, I broke my neck in a diving accident. It was March 13th of 1990, and the ADA was signed into law on July 26th of 1990. So my journey has been very much parallel with the ADA, and most of my experience as a person with disability came after the ADA was in effect. Talk a little about my journey around advocacy. As I said, I broke my neck at 14, so for the first few years, my mom was my advocate. Are there mothers and parents and fathers out here who are advocating for somebody? Yeah, they're out there, right? Fran's mom. So my mom did a lot of the advocacy for me for the first bunch of years, fighting with my school district, trying to make them be physically accessible. I don't have any other disabilities that complicate anything. I just have the spinal cord injury and need a wheelchair and need access. But even that was not always very welcomed by my school. There were struggles around getting an elevator in the high school building and arranging classes and things like that. But Mom took them to task, and really, she was my advocate for a lot of years. So then, like most kids, I go off to college. Start to become independent, and this becomes sort of becoming my own advocate phase. I sometimes call it my righteous anger phase. So I'll tell you a little story. My first car was an '89 Ford Probe. Anybody know what that looks like? Apparently half the crowd has owned one. We are the Ford Probe Collectors Association. So I had an '89 Ford Probe. I bought it with 110,000 miles on it. It was a little red sporty two-door thing. So it looked like a little sports car. So when I bought it, it already has a ton of miles on it. It's red, it's cool. My dad thought I was out of my mind buying a car that already had that many miles on it, but it ran very well. Point of the story. So as I'm getting out and around in the community and doing things like parking in the wheelchair accessible spaces, have people seeing people that violate that and park where they shouldn't be parking.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, all the time. So I would park correctly in my parking space. I need my door to be able to swing out wide. I transfer myself into my driver's seat. I pull apart my wheelchair, stick the wheels in the back, stick the frame on the passenger side. It's not that complicated, little time consuming, but the key is I need to be able to swing my door wide enough to get close to the car. So I would park, get out of the car, go into the store, take care of business, whatever, come back, and then somebody would be parked on that yellow crosshatch, the access aisle where nobody is ever supposed to park. Nobody here parks in those spots, right?
No way.
No. There are people out there, those people out there park in that access aisle. So I was young, and so call me, 19 then. And I'd come back to my car, and I couldn't get in the car because I couldn't get near enough my door, much less open it all the way. Somehow, being young, and I don't even remember how I did this, I got around and I actually got in through the passenger side of my car, pulled the chair apart, threw it in, and then transferred myself over the center console, got into the car, started it up, and then opened my door just as damn hard as I could. It was red. It had a lot of miles on it. I didn't really care. So left a nice mark in their car. Backed it up a foot. Did it again. Backed it up a foot. Did it again. So it's not what I would suggest doing as advocacy techniques now, but I'm not ashamed. They knew the law when they parked there. They chose to accept consequences. So I went from that. That was sort of my era of becoming my own advocate. And as I was finishing up college, I got a job working at the Center for Disability Rights. Had no idea what the Center for Disability Rights was when I applied. I was just looking for a job. Got in. It was kind of cool. I'm like, this will be a good gig for a year. 14 years later, I'm still working there. I'm the Chief Operating Officer. It's worked out pretty well. In that time, though, I became, when I was making my notes, I wrote, professional with quotes. I became a professional advocate. So I don't often smash my car door into things anymore. I have other means of agitating the system. But I've worked in the primary goal of my organization is making sure that people are not forced into nursing facilities and other institutions. That for decades and decades and decades, our society has assumed that because somebody's getting old, because somebody has an injury and is now significantly disabled, that the thing to do is stick them in a nursing home. So my organization has worked very hard against that. We work on a lot of issues that are probably very familiar to everybody here. It's the same issues no matter where you go in the state, no matter where you go in the country. Accessible housing. Anybody working on getting access to housing? Woo! Struggles with housing. Home care services. Getting an aide that comes to your house and does what you need them to do. Struggles with that. Accessible transportation. Can you get on the bus? Does the bus get you where you need to go? Does it cop an attitude? So that's certainly an issue that we've worked a lot on and trying to help people be integrated in our community. The ADA really helped address a lot of this. Not so much housing. The ADA doesn't do a lot around housing, but very much transportation, very much the right to home care services, as well as accessing the physical environment, physical venues, stores, etc. The ADA did a lot on all of that, but we're not there yet. The mere fact that I can talk about these challenges and you'll go, yeah, same problem here, means that the ADA hasn't really finished its job yet, that we haven't finished our job yet. I want to read off a few fairly challenging words published earlier this week from the National Disability Leadership Alliance, NDLA. NDLA is an alliance of national disability groups who are run by people with disabilities. So the philosophy that we see here at Access to Independence and at other centers all across New York State and across the nation, it's an alliance of places like that, places where the person with disability is in charge. So there's deaf groups, there's blind groups, there's physically disabled groups, pretty wide gamut, 12 or 14 different organizations that are involved in NDLA. And they put out this earlier this week. Quote, "This week, people with disabilities across the country are celebrating the 23rd anniversary of the signing of the Americans with Disabilities Act. This was the first comprehensive federal civil rights statute protecting the rights of people with disabilities. The ADA established that people with disabilities have equal opportunity in employment, state and local government, places of accommodation, and telecommunications. Despite the ADA's promise of equal opportunity for people with disabilities, it is clear that more work must be done. More work must be done so that people with disabilities are to be valued as equal citizens and welcomed in all aspects of American life. Today, far too many people with disabilities are forced to live in institutions, forced to receive unwanted treatment, denied programs and services, or to be paid less than minimum wage. On a regular basis, our civil, constitutional, and parental rights are disregarded or stripped away. Our lives and expertise are not valued equally, with dire consequences. Healthcare professionals refuse to communicate with us, overrule the decisions we make or those made by our authorized surrogates. Law enforcement and courts too often fail to treat those who kill people with disabilities the same as those who kill non-disabled people, particularly when an individual has been killed by a family member. Our very freedom of movement can be deprived and our rights stripped from us on the basis of arbitrary and capricious decisions about our capacity. Furthermore, the voices of people with disabilities are frequently ignored in favor of parent or provider organizations that speak about us without us. Policymakers have ignored our expertise about our own lives, issues, and desires instead they allow providers, academics, and family members to speak for us. For those in the disability community from diverse communities, issues of discrimination that they face as people with disabilities are compounded by issues of race, gender, religious affiliation, and sexual orientation." And ends their quote. Not exactly celebratory words. It's the 23rd anniversary, we're honoring the ADA. I think sometimes we talk about celebrating, and we are right to celebrate, but we also need to pay attention to the work that still needs to be done. I think, I appreciate everything they said and bring it up for particularly a reason that's striking me very strongly of late. A story from Rochester, I don't know if it trickled down here at all. the executive director of the county nursing facility in Monroe County, where Rochester is, the executive director was in the newspapers and slammed in a report from the State Department of Health because he took a resident's wheelchair away for 4 days. Took a guy's wheelchair away for 4 days. Wheelchair user living in the nursing facility, the county nursing facility. The executive director decides to take his wheelchair away. Anybody want to guess why? He's staying out later. He was smoking in the wrong area. He smoked outside the door. He was outside, but he was too close to an entrance to the facility. So, for that violation, he had his wheelchair taken away. His wheelchair, ready for this? Ready? His wheelchair privilege was taken away. Anybody here think that wheelchairs are a privilege? If you did, I would have you thrown out. Wheelchairs are no more privileges than your legs are. If you're a walking person, do you have leg privileges? Can they be revoked? Because they revoke the wheelchair privileges of people with disabilities. This particular gentleman, the guy living in the nursing facility, was 77 years old. He had served combat in Korea. He was a double amputee. He was dying of cancer.
Oh, that's nice.
And the executive director decided to take his wheelchair away for 4 days because he was smoking in the wrong spot. I've never been a smoker. Encourage nobody ever touch the stuff. But I gotta say, a 77-year-old dying vet asked me for a cigarette. I'll go to the store and get it for him. Just a little thing there. The incident happened in December. Nothing came out about it until the State Department of Health was actually at the facility for a routine review in March. Some of the staff came to the investigators and said, listen, you got to hear about this. That they had previously been afraid to contact the state for fear of retaliation against their jobs. The state did their investigation in March. It came out in the papers in, I think it was May. By that time, it was in the paper. The county executive, who was the boss of the executive director at the facility, what did she do you think? Nothing. Very good guess. She did nothing. So this guy who wasn't even denying that he did it, this guy who's being slammed in a report by the state, is allowed to continue in his capacity as executive director of the whole facility, being the boss of all the staff. Even though he's saying, I did it. I did it for good reason. That was dangerous behavior. The state did investigate the situation further. I think what makes me continue to get up on my soapbox about this is they investigated his potential crime as a potential Medicaid fraud crime. I don't know, but if I took a random young woman from this audience, and the only thing equivalent for walking people is that we tied you to a bed. If you take somebody, some young woman, and you tie her to the bed for 4 days, what happens? What happens when the state finds out? What happens when the reporters find out?
You go to jail.
You go to jail. No questions asked. It's not a Medicaid fraud investigation. Cops with guns come, not bureaucrats with red pens. So what happened instead for this gentleman was bureaucrats with red pens came and did an investigation, and he was allowed to continue because the only person that he had stripped of his rights was a guy in a wheelchair living in a nursing facility, and that's damn wrong. So we continue to advocate, we're continuing to advocate that the individual, the executive director, needs to be charged with criminal charges. Unfortunately, the resident in the nursing facility passed away. Whether or not it was related to being stripped of his wheelchair for those 4 days, nobody will ever know. But he has since passed. Before all this became news, he had passed. The executive director eventually did lose his job, but he has still not been charged criminally. So for us, there's that, and obviously that is a horrific situation, but it happens all the time. Maybe not in quite as much glory as the executive director being involved. Another young man that's involved with us was in the county nursing home for 6 years. He went in when he was 15. He got out when he was 22. On his 21st birthday, he did what most young men will do. He went out, he got hammered, and he went back to the nursing facility later than curfew. And for that offense, they took his wheelchair away. And these things will continue to happen until we get everybody out. So our organization, and I think our disability rights movement, really is focused on helping people live in the community, as I was talking about accessible housing, talking about home care services. That's what we need so that nobody is in these situations and nobody is, being able to be subject to this kind of abuse.
Our homes, not nursing homes.
Thank you, sir. There is a natural-born chanter and protester. I'm not saying all this to be a downer and be depressing. I think it's just a reality check on the things that we need to accomplish. My organization in Rochester, the Center for Disability Rights, is part of a national group called ADAPT. Has anybody heard of ADAPT? Good, fair number. Some of you have probably joined us in DC or been part of the conference with Nickel, and ADAPT was there. ADAPT does a lot of advocacy. ADAPT, we use what we call the pitchfork approach to advocacy. It's a multi-pronged approach to advocacy is the point. The more tools that you have, the more likely it is that you have the right combination to get the job done. So for ADAPT, the pitchfork approach involves public education and the media. So you need to get your message out. You need to teach people at events like this and events all around the community and news stories, etc., about what the problem is. Teach people about what the problem is. Teach them about what the solution is. Next prong is legislative. You got to work with your legislators. You got to get them to pass laws that work for people with disabilities, that fund home care, that make accessible housing a requirement. You have to work with your executive branch. I think the mayor is going to be here today. Work with folks like that about housing. What kind of housing policies could Cortland do in order to help more people live independently in the community? And another prong is judicial. Judicial lawsuits. So that's working with your lawyers when the law is there and somebody's not following it and other advocacy doesn't work, sue them. So working with your lawyers, working in the judicial system, get it in front of a judge. And then for ADAPT, the final prong of our pitchfork is direct action. So direct action is a very all-encompassing. Direct action can be sort of conventional things like marches, rallies, going and doing testimony at a legislative meeting. For some of us, it can be street theater. I have some fun stories of street theater. But performing and really exemplifying the issue in fun and different ways. It can be protests. It can be arrests. Anybody want to guess how many times have I been arrested?
100.
17, 12, half a dozen, none, 100. 17 is probably fairly close. I'm in I actually don't keep track. So 15, 20, somewhere in that vicinity. I've been arrested about that many times. I was being asked at the table earlier for what? And the range of charges against me have been things like trespass, unlawful assembly, failure to disperse, a couple others like that. And then my favorite I was describing is a charge that's called incommoding. Anybody know what incommoding is? Me neither. So there were about 100 of us arrested in DC one time, and when we got released and had our paperwork, we looked at it and our charge was incommoding. You tell a bunch of people anything that involves the word commode, and you assume that somebody has to go to the bathroom. It's like, no, we didn't do that. We didn't do that. Incommoding, actually, when you look it up, is inconveniencing government. So we were arrested for being inconvenient to the government. How appropriate is that? And we were talking to the table, maybe that could be flipped and we could arrest the government for being inconvenient to the rest of us. So I've been charged with all those different things. I don't know if it's most recently now, but around a year ago, we were in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. The state of Pennsylvania had been actually very strong on their home care and their community-based services, but they got a new governor in. The new governor was hacking and slashing the community services. So a lot of us joined the advocates there in Pennsylvania, in their capital, Harrisburg.
Been a huge advocate for her daughter.
So we went down, and Harrisburg now has in my arrest record, Harrisburg has the dubious distinction of being the first time I was actually charged with a misdemeanor. Everything else I've been arrested for was a violation, not any more serious than a traffic ticket. Not that I have any of those. No cops looking? Okay, good. So everything else I had was a misdemeanor or a violation. In Harrisburg, I was charged with a misdemeanor. It was the first time. It was also the first time that I had ever been in the back of a real live police cruiser. And it was the first time I went to a real live jail cell. And for the record, they do make that sound with the gates when it closes. It is an impressive sound. Like, that thing is not opening ever. So that was the experience in Harrisburg, which leads to a bit of a funny story. My wife was telling my kids what was Dad doing in Harrisburg, and they know the generalities of what I do in protesting and civil rights and rights for people with disabilities. But they're young kids. My daughter's going to be 10, my son is 6. So she was explaining this, and that Daddy got arrested, and he went to jail, and we should be proud of him for fighting for our rights. Okay, good. It's not how it came through when my son was sharing the stories at kindergarten. So I'm going to read to you a letter that I wrote to the other parents who also had kids in my son's kindergarten class.
They don't care.
So, from me, it has come to our attention that Kyle recently was telling his classmates that his dad was arrested and taken away by the police. It's true, but here's the thing. It's my job. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at the Center for Disability Rights, and I do disability rights advocacy. Sometimes that includes nonviolent civil disobedience and the traditions of Gandhi and Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. During a recent trip to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, 40 people from Rochester joined with about 400 people from across the nation to protest that state's deep cuts in home care services. Without these services, seniors and people with disabilities often are forced into nursing facilities and other institutions. During the actions, I was arrested and taken away with about 50 others, most of us with disabilities ourselves. My wife shared this story with our children, and Kyle related part of the story to the rest of the class without the other context. Oh my. I'm sorry if this has caused any confusion or concern for your family. You can read more about what we do at www.cdrnys.org if you're interested. I'd also be happy to answer any questions you may have. You can call me at my cell phone. So I think in a little bit of traditional Chris style, I tried to take the opportunity to educate further. It's like, so my son is telling people that his dad was taken away to jail. Which kindergartners say whether or not it's true anyway. So I wasn't sure the appropriate intervention on this one. It's like, oh, are the parents just going to pretend that it's just another kid story they make up, like my dad is Superman kind of things? Or are they going to be nervous that I'm some kind of felon? So I went with the latter, and we did the letter so that we could sort of intervene on telling what the real story is, but also to say, hey, by the way, here's the issue. If you want to know more, just give me a call. I'll get you involved. So I think it's important for us as a community always to be doing that kind of outreach, even in strange situations, to try to get more people engaged in the work that we do and understanding the barriers that still remain and how we can work together to overcome them. Just a couple of success stories over our past in doing some of that type of work with the multi-pronged approach, doing the public education, working with legislators, governors, etc., and doing the protests. Here in New York State, we passed and now have in service what's called the Nursing Home Transition and Diversion Waiver. Anybody know the NHTD waiver? We have a few back there. We have service coordinators, people whose jobs get paid through that. We probably have people here who are receiving services in their home, in their community because of that. We worked on that waiver, that program, because at the time, New York State had a couple other programs, but they had gaps that just didn't make sense. We had the traumatic brain injury program, which was very good if you had a traumatic brain injury and your injury occurred between the ages of 18 and 64. But if you had a stroke on your 65th birthday, you were out of luck. Didn't make any sense to anybody. If you had MS, that had lesions on your brain that acted very similarly to brain injury, you were out of luck. It wasn't a traumatic injury. So we had these holes and these gaps that didn't make sense to anybody, and we worked very hard to get the NHTD waiver passed in law and then in place. And now that's been providing services to people for the past 4, 5 maybe years. And across the state, we probably have 2,000 or 3,000 people that without this waiver would be living in nursing facilities, and that is a cool success that really comes from the persistence of a lot of people in a lot of parts of the state doing a lot of different kinds of advocacy, working with Democrats, working with Republicans, making it happen. So that was an awesome success. One of the stories I like to tell that goes back a few more years We used to have a president by the last name of Clinton. Anybody remember a President Clinton? Right. Going back a few years. When Clinton was still in office, it was his last year, we were down and we were protesting at the White House because Clinton, as one of his final moves, was doing a $1 billion giveaway basically to the nursing facility industry. Why? Anybody here want to live in a nursing home? You know, no matter how many times I ask that question, nobody ever puts their hand up. Never, not one. So nobody wants to live in a nursing home. Why would we give the nursing facilities an extra $1 billion? It don't make sense. So we went and about 500 of us chained ourselves to the White House fence. A lot of people with physical disabilities like mine, deaf, blind, mental health, psychiatric, et cetera, people from all sorts of disabilities. We went and we protested, and that action forced the White House under Clinton to start negotiating with us. We had a series of meetings that led to other meetings, but over time they actually took that $1 billion and reinvested almost all of it into community services. So that was $1 billion that 500 of us shifted by being chained to the White House fence. On a day like this, I gotta say, it was 70, 80, sunny degrees, and I would do anything for that amount of money. I chain myself to anything. You name it, I'll chain myself to it if you're gonna give me millions and billions of dollars for home care services. And actually, if you take that $1 billion, and there were about 500 of us, that's about $2 million that were shifted per body. So I would happily chain myself to anything for $2 million. Any takers? Anybody got $2 million? I think we have a couple people who are going with me. Excellent. Additionally, we with some of our work in the state and down in DC, we had the Community First Choice option included in healthcare reform. The Community First Choice, or CFC, will help reform how we do home care services so that instead of things being about what diagnosis do you have, it'll be about, well, what do you need? That a lot of times we have different diagnoses, but we have the same need, and our systems are so focused on, well, what's your diagnosis? Oh, we can't help you. You know, you don't have the right diagnosis. So CFC will be shifting us towards a system where it's actually, what do you need and how can we help you get that? So that's a cool success. So a round of applause for successes over time. In order to achieve those and achieve the things we need to do in the future, our strength is our numbers. We are not a rich community. We can't throw a lot of money at our politicians and run a lot of paid advertising to educate the broader community about our issues, but we have a lot of us. We have a lot of people who are disabled, we have a lot of family members, we have a lot of workers. So our strength really is our numbers and our people. The cross-disability perspective of independent living centers is huge. You know, we have it today, that we have a lot of different types of disabilities, a lot of different types of non-disabled folks. And it is that kind of working together that's going to be crucial. We need to hold our elected officials and ourselves accountable. I think that what's been important for me the past few weeks in really looking at this is what are we going to be able to say next year that we accomplished? That I think too often elected officials, we let them get away with saying, well, we tried this or we're working on this, and that's nice, but it ain't good enough. What have you done? How are things better? But I think we need to ask the same thing of ourselves. What have we accomplished? How are things better because of our work? A few last words from the NDLA Alliance that I was talking about earlier. Quote, as we celebrate the 23rd anniversary of the signing of the ADA, excitement is already building and planning has already begun for the quarter-century anniversary. Today, we call on policymakers to work with us to achieve that vision so that on the 25th anniversary of the ADA, we will not just be celebrating disability rights victories from a quarter-century earlier, but heralding a new day in our movement. And I think that's what's really vital, and that's what's really exciting me. Next year, what are we going to say we got done? 2 years from now, what are we going to say? I know I'm not as young as I used to be. I don't crawl across my car quite how a little Dukes of Hazzard style or anything, and I don't mash my door into other cars anymore. But I really want to be able to be telling the next success stories. that I don't want to be doing this presentation in a few years and still talking about President Clinton. That was 1999, maybe 2000. That's almost 15 years old. We need to be talking about more recent successes, and I think that those success stories begin today. So I will end with that. Thank you all for having me, and I am happy to entertain questions. Creepy right behind me.
I have a question.